Hello everyone, thank you for signing into my live stream. I'm Mr. Matt and this is Dr. Todd. And welcome to SAT ACT Prep. Today's a writing skills day, so we're going to actually talk about a punctuation topic, commas. We're going to do this over 2 sessions this week and next Thursday. Commas is one of the largest sections among the punctuation marks, and that's because there's a lot of particular rules. You're going to see that these rules, there are a few of them that can never be broken, but as in with many subtopics in grammar, there are some rules that you cannot break. There are other rules or many rules that are quite flexible, and it's really about being consistent rather than necessarily remembering choosing one version over the other. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you, and we're going to talk about a few rules and look at some examples. Okay, so first of all, let's just review some clauses. And again, remember these are live sessions, so there's a little bit of a delay between my iPad and the broadcast, but I'll make sure to keep an eye on that. And if there's any questions, if you need me to review, scroll up or scroll down or repeat something, just let me know in the comment section. So first of all, let's talk about dependent versus independent clauses. So dependent clauses cannot stand on their own as a complete sentence. They're either lacking a subject or a verb. To be a complete sentence, you need a subject and a verb. That's technically all you need. Usually, most sentences also have what's called a predicate, and that's a fancy word for basically everything else in a sentence. But if you have a subject and a verb, like we went, that technically is a complete sentence unto itself. But if you're lacking one of those elements, then what you have is a dependent clause. You can combine that with an independent clause to make a complete sentence. However, it cannot stand on its own as a complete statement. It doesn't express a complete thought unit. And that's what a complete sentence is supposed to do, is express one complete thought unit. So we can combine clauses together using particular rules in grammar, comma rules that we're going to go through. You can also coordinate the meaning between clauses using support signals, contrasting signals, and cause-effect signals. So a few examples of those. Let me just make sure that you can make that a little bit smaller for you guys. So support signals, these are words like and, additionally, furthermore, and they go one in kind to each other, where the first clause is supporting or adding to the fact or detail of the second clause. So you can think of it as like a positive-positive relationship, or conversely a negative-negative relationship. So I don't like chocolate nor vanilla ice cream. That's a negative-negative. Or I do like chocolate and vanilla ice cream. You can also use, notice contrast signals are the opposite of that. So it's the two opposing sides and contrasting with each other. So you might have a positive-negative valuation or a negative-positive valuation. And that comes up a lot, especially with diction problems when you're looking at word choice and vocabulary. Some answer selections on the SAT will have more than one descriptor or more than one word, and you have to make sure that all of those words match, and oftentimes one will work but the other won't, and that's not an indicator of a correct answer at all. Also, a little subtopic underneath of contrast signals. There are these words that may seem to contrast, but they actually signal the ironic, whereas contrast signals may be completely diametrically opposed, or they might be absolutely opposing of one another, like light versus dark, bright versus dim, those wet versus dry. Those are kind of total opposites of one another. But there might be words like ironically, surprisingly, paradoxically. These words signal the ironic, or that there's some effect that's contrary to convention, or what you would normally think would happen. So for example, like rainy and sunny. So they're not necessarily like direct opposites of each other, and they can happen. It can rain while it's sunny, but you wouldn't necessarily always think that would be most common, and so it's surprising if that were to occur. So that's what I mean. So words that signal the ironic, that you can think of them as contrast signals, but they're not exactly like black or white. There's just a little bit, there's more detail and subtlety to their interpretation. And then lastly, we have cause-effect signals. So these are more logic-based conjunctions, like because, additionally, also, like because, consequently, in conclusion, those types of things, due to. These establish a logical connection between one clause and another, and that there's some type of progression in fact or event that connects the two. So one goes hand in hand with the other, and that can occur in a wide variety of contexts, so you really have to, it's a little bit subjective, it's open to interpretation, and you have to read into the sentence as to what is going on. But the word because or due to, it's going to show that one thing causes the other, so you can deduce a relationship between those two objects or concepts. If there's any questions, then please let me know. Now, the first real rule that I wanted to talk to you about with commas specifically is the use of the Oxford comma. So here, this is where as a writer you get to have a level of preference. This is one of the rules that are flexible. It's just a matter of being consistent throughout the piece that you're writing or within your own writing. The Oxford comma is the comma placed before the conjunction and in a series listing. So like, I need to go to the store to buy milk, comma, eggs, comma, and milk. That last comma is actually optional, and that's called the Oxford comma. You'll see in a lot of fiction, many writers don't prefer to omit the Oxford comma, thinking that it's redundant or needless. But it's up to you whether to use it or not. But the main rule is that you just have to pick a preference and then not deviate back and forth, at least within the same piece. You can change your mind throughout life. Personally, I always use it because there are scenarios in which if you don't use it, it can cause confusion to the reader. So personally, I just always put a comma before the conjunction and or the last item. It's not just the conjunction and, it's the last item in a series listing. I always use it just to avoid the contemplation as to whether it's going to cause confusion if I omit it. So it's up to you. But your choice must be consistent throughout your piece, and you should not switch back and forth unless not using the Oxford comma would cause confusion to the reader. In that case, it would be appropriate to use the Oxford comma in that one situation and then go back to not using it merely because that one situation would have caused confusion. So, and there's an example here that will give you an idea about when that could cause confusion. So for example, the store has run out of green bean, comma, peas and carrots, comma, and broccoli frozen vegetable bags. So notice without that Oxford comma, if we didn't have this Oxford comma here, it would be confusing as to how many vegetable bags or combinations there are. Right? We could think that there were maybe 4 combinations, that there was a bag of green beans, a bag of peas, a bag of carrots, and a bag of broccoli. Or you could interpret it as there's just 2 combinations, one bag that's just green beans, and then another combination that's peas, carrots, and broccoli. But in reality, peas and carrots is a combination unto itself, and then we have a vegetable bag full of just green beans, and then a vegetable bag full of just broccoli. So in this situation, in a scenario like this, not using the Oxford comma would cause confusion to the reader, or there would be an ambiguity, something that would be unclear to them. So you would, in this one, if you were choosing not to use the Oxford comma as a writer, and you were writing this sentence in this one scenario, it would be appropriate to use it and then not use it again. But as I said before, I always just use it to make sure I don't have to think about it. But you'll see a lot of examples, particularly in published work and fiction, where they don't, and magazines, a lot of newspapers don't use the Oxford comma. So I just want you to be aware that it's not technically wrong, it's just more about being consistent. And if you have any questions, then please let me know. So let's do a little practice. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I'd like you to look at the following 4 sentences and insert the Oxford comma as appropriate, as well as any additional commas that you may feel are needed. But I'll keep track of the time in the upper right-hand corner and update it per minute, and then I'll give you the answers. Okay, so number 1, the box is filled with trucks, dolls, and figurines. So the first item in this series is trucks. So we'd have trucks, comma, dolls, and that comma right there would be the Oxford comma, and then the conjunction and figurines. So trucks, comma, dolls, commas, and figurines. Number 2, you'll see that the comma listing doesn't have to be just singular nouns. They can also be phrases. So a bird flew across the bridge, down the canal, and into my bedroom. So he flew across the bridge, comma, down the canal, comma, and into my bedroom. And I'll highlight the Oxford comma in blue. Number 3, there were 16 pennies, 5 nickels, 3 dimes, and a quarter piled into the corner against the wall. So there are 16 pennies, comma, 5 nickels, comma, 3 dimes, comma, and a quarter piled into the corner against the wall. Whoops, I meant to highlight that one. So this is the Oxford comma right there. And last one, there is a hotel, a motel, and a bed and breakfast in that town. So there is a hotel, comma, motel, comma, and a bed and breakfast in that town. Recognize that bed and breakfast is a compound noun. It has more than one word in its name, but it's not plural. It's not like there's a bed and then a breakfast. It's one physical establishment. It just has more than one word in its name. It's one of those rare names, rare nouns. If you have any questions, then please let me know. Let's look at the second rule now. And we're going to look at when we can join a dependent clause with an independent clause. So whenever we have a dependent-independent clause construction, we're going to use a comma to separate the clauses from each other. Now the order does matter because oftentimes if you have a dependent clause and, oftentimes if you have an independent clause and then a dependent clause, that usually does not require a comma. But if you begin with a dependent clause and then end with the independent clause, there needs to be a comma in between those two clauses. So for example, at 3 o'clock, comma, he needs to go to work. At 3 o'clock is a dependent clause. If somebody came up to you and said at 3 o'clock, do you know the complete thought unit that they're trying to express? No, it's missing information, right? But if somebody came up to you, and it might be a little odd if somebody just came up to you and said this and a little random, but just imagine for a second that you had more context to the conversation. If somebody came up to you and said he needs to go to work, again, it might be random, but you know the complete thought unit that they're trying to express. Some guy needs to go to work, and assuming you know who he represents or refers to. So you can see the difference there, that he is a subject, needs is a verb. He needs go to, at 3 o'clock he needs to go to work. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. I looked right past that. At 3 o'clock he needs to go to work, not go to work. I don't know how that got switched around. My apologies. I should mention that. Here, just to be clear, he is the subject, and then needs to go to work is a phrasal verb. And so we have an independent clause there. So we have a dependent-independent clause. You need a comma between the two clauses to be grammatically correct. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Please look at 1 through 4, and then I'll give you the answers. Okay, so number one, because they already won twice, the team is excited to play another game. So the addition of this word because makes the first clause, they already won twice, a clause that normally would be independent unto itself, but when you add or you introduce it with the word because, it sets up a logical connection that you're implying between that clause and the one to follow. Because they're saying because they already won twice, this is the cause of the effect of them being excited to play another game. So because they've already won twice, they want to play again, basically, and that conjunction because sets up that relationship. So to be clear, this would normally be an independent clause, but when you add because in the beginning, that becomes a dependent clause. So we have a dependent and then independent clause construction. The team is excited to play another game. That could be its own sentence, right? We have a subject, the team. We have a verb, is excited to play. And then we have a predicate, another game. So between a dependent and independent clause, we need a comma, just a comma. So that should be between twice and the article the. Number two, although she prefers chocolate, she thought the vanilla wafer was delicious. Again, we have this conditional word here, although, that's setting up a relationship that's implying a relationship, a contrasted relationship between the second and first clause. She prefers chocolate is an independent clause unto itself, but when you add although, that sets up a conditional meaning. There's more that you need now because they set up a relationship that without the second clause would not make sense or wouldn't be fully fleshed out. So although she prefers chocolate, comma, dependent, and then independent clause, she thought the vanilla wafer was delicious. Number three, compared to the left side, the right side of the car is undamaged. So the second clause, the right side of the car is undamaged, that could be its own sentence. But compared to the left side cannot be its own sentence. If somebody came up to you and said compared to the left side, you're like, what compared to the left side, right? We need something else to compare it to. So the right side of the car is undamaged, that's an independent clause. Compared to the left side, that's a dependent clause. So we have a dependent independent clause construction, so we need a comma to separate the clauses. And actually, let me get rid of this line. So a comma between side and the article the. Number four, if you can send me the package as soon as possible. You see how without the comma, without the notice of when to take a break or a pause, the sentence is a little bit weird to read. So this should be, if you can, send me the package as soon as possible. Now, if you can, that's a dependent clause. The second clause is a complete sentence unto itself, and I want to pause for a second and just kind of go into this a little bit more. In English, command phrases can be a little bit irregular in the fact that the subject is implied rather than stated. It's omitted, in fact. So when somebody says send me the package, they really mean you send me the package. Me is not me in that sentence is not the subject of the clause, is not the subject of the verb. It's you that should send me the package, right? So me is an object. You are the subject, but the command phrases, the command conjugations in English have that implied in the meaning. So you don't, a lot of times the subject is omitted in those types of phrases. You don't commonly hear people say, you send me that. It sounds actually a little bit aggressive if somebody were to say that. But just notice that that's not incorrect. I don't want you to think that there's something wrong with that sentence. It's just something that goes along with the command phrasing or the conjugating the verbs into command phrases where we omit the subject. And that happens sometimes and more frequently than you may realize. Technically, if you pick up the phone and somebody says, may I speak to Mr. Matt? And I say, this is he, right? The correct answer is this is he, because this is he speaking. A lot of people make the incorrect choice of saying this is him or this is her. But really it's this is he speaking or this is her speaking. Excuse me, this is she speaking. It needs to be in the nominative form of the pronoun because you're doing the action, not receiving the action. If you have any questions about that, just let me know. But the takeaway here is that the command phrases can be tricky. And it's not as if there's no subject there, it's just implied. So if you can, dependent clause, you send me the package as soon as possible. That's an independent clause with an implied subject, and it can stand on its own. So we have a dependent-independent clause construction, so we just use a comma between the clauses. If you have any questions, please let me know. Now, what if we want to conjoin two independent clauses, two complete sentences? Well, then we need a comma conjunction. So we can still use a comma, but we also need a conjunction. And this is not an exhaustive list at all, but it's just a nice acronym that you can remember what a conjunction is. So fanboys is an acronym that you can use to remember very common conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. And so, again, the rule here is that instead of just a comma, you must have a comma conjunction. If you don't have a conjunction, then you have what's called a comma splice, where you're trying to just squeeze two complete sentences together with just a comma. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes, and I'm going to actually, I'll give you 2 minutes just for the sake of time. I think these are pretty quick. I'll give you 2 minutes. Please look at 1 through 4, and then I'll give you the answers. Okay, so let's go through these. Number 1, the dog ran, independent clause, and the cat jumped, another independent clause. So we need a comma conjunction, so we need a comma before the end. Number 2, I arrived home, that's an independent clause, and what I saw horrified me. That's also an independent clause. So we need a comma conjunction. Number 3, there are 2 squares on the left. That can be its own sentence. And there are 3 triangles on the right. That can also be its own sentence. So we need a comma conjunction. Number 4, we would not like to leave. That can be in its own sentence. But I know she has to be up early tomorrow. I know she has to be up early tomorrow is its own sentence as well. So we need a comma conjunction. If you have any questions, then please let me know. Otherwise, I want to move on to the next subtopic. I want to talk about the abbreviations IE, EG, and etc. So what do they mean and how are they punctuated? So IE, a lot of students think that IE and EG, first of all, are either similar, or the same, I should say, not similar, mean the same thing or interchangeable when they're not. They do mean different things. And there's also a misconception that IE is an abbreviation for the English phrase in example. And it's not. They're actually abbreviations for Latin phrases. IE means is when you're using a specific example, and sometimes it can be more conceptual rather than necessarily the exact thing that you're trying to mention or give an example of, although it could be. But IE means more that is to say, whereas EG is the one that means in example. And EG is usually used when you're listing several items that are examples, and you're also implying that there are many more that you could list, but you're omitting just for the sake of space or time or whatnot. So IE, usually descriptive, and it serves to redefine or enhance the meaning of a concept or term. So for example, stepping in the candy store, he was overwhelmed by the confectionery kaleidoscope before him, i.e. every assortment of every kind, color, and flavor. So otherwise, this phrase, confectionery kaleidoscope, is a little bit unclear. I mean, it's pretty vivid. It has a lot of, nice color and imagery to it, but it wouldn't necessarily, it's a little bit vague or general. So by expanding on that, and notice that the IE is occurring mid-sentence, and so it's surrounded by 2 commas. And it doesn't matter that there's a period and then a comma. Period and then comma can occur in grammar. What may not occur is 2 periods, or 2 commas really, but especially 2 periods next to each other. And we're going to get into that at a later rule too. So when IE occurs mid-sentence, you need to surround it with commas. When they end the sentence, you omit one of the commas, one of the periods. Because notice you'd end the sentence with a period, and then the abbreviation has a period itself, and that's a rule with any abbreviation that has periods in it. If you're ending the sentence with the abbreviation, like maybe somebody is a medical doctor, so they have MD, M period D period, after their name as an abbreviation for medical doctor. If that ends the sentence, you don't use 2 periods at the end. You just omit one. It's always just 1 period. This guy is an ellipse or ellipse. Some people say it either way, but ellipse. And that's a totally different punctuation mark. And that's not to be confused with 2 periods next to each other, which is always wrong. EG, as I said, is used in a listing of examples, and oftentimes it implies that there's other examples that are omitted. So you could have said more, but you didn't. You're just giving a few examples to illustrate a point. So that's the main difference between IE and EG. And etc. So for example, let me give you an example of that. All the regular supplies, e.g. pots, pans, utensils, will be supplied at the base camp. So they're probably also going to supply things like rope or like propane gas or firewood, but they're just not, they're using e.g. to imply that this is not an exhaustive list, but let me just give you a smattering of items that are available to give you the idea that there are many, many more to come. Etc. So etc. means so on and so forth, or more of the same. So it's a way of gesturing, verbally gesturing at the fact that it's kind of like waving your hand on and on. So it's a way of saying that you can use this to use the listing to establish the pattern or recognize the pattern that's being presented and think of your own examples yourself or imagine that there are many more. That's basically the gist of etc. So for example, his entire office was a smattering of half-used office supplies, pens, pencils, sticky notes, bins, binders, etc., spewing off his desk onto the surrounding floors and walls. So there's many other things other than just pens, pencils, sticky notes, bins, and binders, but that's just a few of the many more, and they're basically establishing a rule of just different examples of office supplies, so then you could think of your own examples, because the idea is that this guy's office is just totally crazy messy. Okay, if there's any questions, please let me know. Oops. Just a few more rules. Also, so when addressing an individual by name, rank, title, or by a term of endearment would be like sweetie or like honey pie or my dear friend, something like that. When the name occurs mid-sentence, it should be surrounded by commas. If the ending word already contains a period, then you only use one period. So like basically what we said before. So for example, the best player on the school's baseball team is Joe Smith, comma, Jr. So he has a suffix after his name, so his father is also Joe Smith, so he's Joe Smith Jr. Notice that we're ending the sentence with Jr., so you don't add an extra period. You omit one of them and you only have one period to end the sentence. Number 2, Joe Smith, MD, was the best speaker in my opinion. So notice that his title as a medical doctor is becoming mid-sentence, so it's surrounded by commas. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Please look at 1 through 4, and then I'll give you the answers. Okay, so number one, Dr. John Johnson, PhD, has arrived early. So his title of PhD needs to be is occurring mid-sentence, so it should be surrounded by commas. Number two, Mr. Charles Birmingham Sr. is here with his wife, Dr. Alyssa Birmingham, MD. So senior is a suffix that needs to be surrounded by commas. Technically, there is an option just with junior or senior that it's either 2 commas that surround the entire suffix or no commas at all. So technically, no commas is also correct or grammatically correct. It would not be correct to use just 1 comma. And I know that sounds really picky, but in general, what I do is I just always use commas because then I don't have to think about it. So Mr. Charles Birmingham, comma, senior, period, comma, is here with his wife, Dr. Alyssa Birmingham, comma, MD, period. So M period D period. Now you don't double the period, but you do need 1 to end the sentence. Number 3, did you, mother, get the apples for the pie? So we're addressing mother by her title. And so we need to offset it, and that's occurring mid-sentence, so we need to offset it with commas. And 4, no, Rachel, I did not. So we're addressing Rachel by name, so her name, and it's occurring mid-sentence, so we need to offset her name with commas as well. If there are any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'd like you to look at the following 5 questions, and you're going to correct the following sentences by either adding or removing commas. Mostly adding. I don't think I actually put any to remove. But I'll give you 5 minutes, and then I'll give you the answers. Okay, so number one, on the top of the box, that's a dependent clause, comma, you will find a present that I left for you. That's an independent clause. So we have dependent, independent clause construction, so we need a comma between the clauses. Number two, I don't like green peppers. That's an independent clause, but my best friend loves them. My best friend loves them is an independent clause as well, so we need a comma conjunction. So we have comma, but. Number three, I need markers, pens, and paper at the office supplies store. So I need markers, comma, pens, comma, and paper at the office supplies store. If you chose not to use, not to use the Oxford comma, then you wouldn't have that comma right there, and that would be fine as long as you were consistent. This is in contrast to where we could also have used comma, e.g., period, comma, markers, pens, and paper, comma, at the office supply store. So if we were to use the e.g., that's how it would be punctuated in that situation. 4, who are you, Jacob, to question me? So Jacob is being addressed by name and it's occurring mid-sentence, so we need to offset his name with commas. And number 5, there are so many things to do, wash the car, vacuum the house, wipe down the counters, etc., that I just can't waste a second here. So there are so many things to do, comma, so many things to do, comma, wash the car, comma, vacuum the house, comma, wipe down the counters, comma, etc., comma, that I just can't waste a second here. Now you could have also, because there's so many commas here, we'll go through, when we go through dashes, you'll learn that dashes are very versatile punctuation marks, and their main point is to take the spot of another punctuation mark. This isn't their main point, but oftentimes how they're used by writers is an alternative to a more common punctuation mark that they've already used a lot of. So in this situation, notice we could have also used dashes right here to really set off that parenthetical listing of phrases, of actions that we need to do. There are so many things to do, dash, wash the car, comma, vacuum the house, comma, wipe down the counters, comma, etc., period, comma, dash, excuse me, if we had a dash, we wouldn't use a comma, but then we'd have dash, and then the essential portion of the sentence, which notice the essential portion here is there are so many things to do that I just can't waste a second here. That's the essence of the whole thought unit that's trying to be expressed. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll give you 5 more minutes. This is set B. And actually, let me see if I can get it. Okay, so number 1. Justin, you shouldn't be so quick to judge. So we're addressing Justin by name. However, this time it's starting the sentence, but so we're not going to have a comma before because it's the first word in the sentence, but we should have a comma after his name. Justin, comma, you shouldn't be so quick to judge. 2, I like all the things she does, e.g. going to the movies, shopping online, and watching YouTube. No wonder we've been friends since middle school. So I like all the things she does. That's an independent clause. Then we kind of have this parenthetical injection, e.g., so we know we have to surround e.g. when it occurs mid-sentence. Then we have a series listing of phrasal verbs, going to the movies, comma, shopping online, comma, and watching YouTube. And that's the end of that interjection, that parenthetical phrase listing. So we need to wrap that up with, or end that with a comma as well. The whole parenthetical clause, and we'll get more into parentheticals in later lessons, but parentheticals basically just inject a piece of information into the middle of a sentence. They provide more detail. Here, this is doing that with an e.g. comma listing. But we need to make sure that there's a comma after YouTube. The essential meaning of this sentence is I like all the things she does. No wonder we've been friends since middle school. That's the essential meaning here. Number 3, we're going to the beach, but my dog can't come with us this time. So we are going to the beach. That is an independent clause. My dog can't come with us this time. That's also an independent clause. We have an independent clause construction, so we need a comma conjunction. So we have the conjunction but we need a comma before it. Number 4, even if he did, I doubt he would have a good time. So even if he did, that's a dependent clause. If somebody came up to you and said, even if he did, it's even what, right? It's setting up a relationship between the two clauses, and then you're not giving me the second clause. So even if he did, dependent clause, I doubt he would have a good time, independent clause. So we have a dependent, comma, independent clause, clause construction, excuse me. And number 5, I love to go to the lake in the summer to boat, swim, and hike every day. So we have a series listing of verbs here, to boat, comma, swim, comma, and hike every day. If you have any questions, then please let me know. Otherwise, let's take a look at set C. I'm going to give you 5 more minutes. Okay, so number one, in the spring, the flowers are so striking. So in the spring is a dependent clause. The flowers are so striking is an independent clause. So we need just a comma between a dependent and independent clause. Number two, I do like the spring, but fall is my favorite. So I do like the spring, that's an independent clause. Fall is my favorite is also an independent clause. So we have an independent clause construction. We need a comma conjunction. So we need a comma before the conjunction but. Number three, winter brings ice, snow, freezing rain, etc. So I usually wish it over as soon as possible. So we have winter brings ice, comma, snow, comma, freezing rain, comma, etc. Remember, etc. is occurring mid-sentence, so we need to surround it with commas as well. So I usually wish it over as soon as possible. Number four, Tony, isn't summer your favorite season? So we're addressing Tony by name, so we need a comma after Tony. Hello, Dr. Todd. I think he woke up. Donnell, number five, Donnell likes each for a different reason: winter, spring, summer, and fall. So Donnell likes each for a different reason, dash, winter, comma, spring, comma, summer, and fall. Of course, that last comma is an Oxford comma, so if you chose not to use it, that's technically not incorrect. You just want to be consistent. Let's look at, if you have any questions, of course, let me know. Otherwise, let's look at set D. And this will bring us up to the end of class today, and we'll pick back up next week with some more rules and mixed review. Okay, so 5 minutes. Okay, so number one, every time he looks at me, oops, sorry. Every time he looks at me with that squint, I know. This is an interesting clause combination because notice every time he looks at me with that squint is a dependent clause. It's a rather long dependent clause, but if somebody came up to you and said, every time he looks at me with that squint, you're lacking what happens, right? Well, every time what? Every time he looks at you with the squint, what happens? So that's indicative of a dependent clause. Then we have the clause I know, which is actually an independent clause. It can stand on its own because you have a subject, I, and then you have a verb, know. So that satisfies the requirements for a complete sentence, which is a little bit ironic, but that the longer clause is the dependent one. But we need a comma between, that's a really big comma. Let me see, comma, there we go. Every time he looks at me with that squint, comma, I know. Comma, i.e. Remember, i.e. means such that or such as he thinks I'm lying. So it's redefining or it's re-explaining this concept of I know. I know what? Well, I know that because he's squinting that he thinks that I'm lying to him. If you have any questions, then please let me know. Number two, there are 16 days before the return policy is no longer valid. I don't know if I want to keep it. So this is an independent clause. There are 16 days before the return policy is no longer valid. And then also, I don't know if I want to keep it. That's also an independent clause. Remember, if we want to conjoin an independent and independent clause together, we need a comma conjunction. So we need comma and then some conjunction like maybe but, because we're contrasting here. So there are 16 days before the return policy is no longer valid, comma, but I don't know if I want to keep it. Number three, there are so many things to eat at the picnic, comma, hot dogs, hamburgers, chips and dip, and corn on the cob, comma, that I can't believe he doesn't like anything here. So these two commas that are placed are appropriate. We have this parenthetical listing of items here. We just need to be careful that all of the items represent just one dish, or how many dishes they represent or items they represent. So there are so many things to eat at the picnic, comma, hot dogs, comma, hamburgers, comma. Now chips and dip, that's one dish. That's a little tricky, but chips and dip go together. Technically, that's one dish. And then corn on the cob, we haven't gone through this, but technically this should be hyphenated, I believe. I do believe corn on the cob is a hyphenated name. That I can't believe he doesn't like anything here. So we just need commas between the series listings in the parenthetical clause. 4, I heard, sir, that the shipment hasn't yet arrived, but did we not pay for overnight shipping? So we're addressing sir by a title or by a name of respect, a title of respect. That the shipment hasn't arrived yet, comma, but did we not pay for overnight shipping? So notice that I heard, sir, that the shipment hasn't arrived. That's an independent clause. Did we not pay for overnight shipping? That's also an independent clause, so we need a comma conjunction to separate the two. And lastly, we have number 5. If you take trips, you will end up feeling adventurous, but if you don't take trips, then you may never know adventure at all. So if you take trips, that's a dependent clause. You will end up feeling adventurous. That's an independent clause. Between an independent and a dependent, between a dependent and an independent clause, we need a comma. So we need a comma between trips and you. Then notice we have a dependent clause. If you don't take trips, and then we have an independent clause, you may never know adventure at all. So again, between a dependent and an independent clause, then we need this. We need a comma. And then also, between the overall two clause combinations together, this is kind of a big combination of two different dependent-independent constructions. We need a comma conjunction between the entire two constructions. So this should be, if you take trips, comma, you will end up feeling adventurous, comma, but if you don't take trips, comma, then you may never know adventure at all. If there are any questions at all, then please let me know in the comment section. You can either let me know either in the live chat feed or in the comment section below. But otherwise, thank you guys very much for signing into my stream. We're going to continue next Thursday with commas because there are more rules that we need to review. But otherwise, please like my stream and favorite and subscribe to my channel if you find these videos helpful. I'm going to be recording more videos that we missed earlier in the week, so look out for those. But otherwise, Dr. Todd, are you going to say goodbye to everybody? You guys say goodbye and do your job. Come on. You guys say goodbye. Come on. Yeah, good boy. Say bye to everybody. All right, thank you guys very much for watching. I'll talk to you all soon.